Daniel chapter 2 begins by saying, "In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. And the king commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king." This is the brain trust of the empire. The magicians use enchantments, the astrologers use the stars, the sorcerers use spirits, and the Chaldeans, who are the scientists, use nature. And when they were confronted with the king's request to tell him the dream that he'd forgotten, they responded, "Tell us the dream and we can give you the interpretation." The king threatened death or blessings, whether they would give the interpretation and the dream. Just like God, who tells ahead of time the end results of one class or the other. And the magicians ended up saying, only the gods that aren't of this world can tell the king his dream. So they faced a wisdom crisis, and they were unable to tell the king his dream. So the next part of the book, of the chapter in Daniel 2, deals with Daniel when confronted with he and his friends with the possibility of being carried to death. They asked the king for time because they wanted to consult with God, just like Jeremiah, who asked for time to pray and to seek God. Like James 1 verse 5 says, "If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God." And so Daniel and his friends, they asked God for understanding in this matter. And through prayer and waiting, God revealed the secret, and Daniel thanked God in verses 20 to 22. It says, "And Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." That shows that God is all-wise, omniscient, and all-powerful, omnipotent. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He reproveth kings and setteth up kings. There it shows that God is immanent. He deals with things on this earth. And he giveth wisdom unto the wise. God gives wisdom to his children that ask him, and knowledge to those that know understanding. So he communicates. He communicates with his children. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness. That shows his omnipresence, that he can see everywhere, and the light dwelleth with him. So just as Paul says in Colossians, I believe it's in Philippians, that with prayer we should give thanksgiving. So these young men gave thanks to God. And the third section of chapter 2 then deals with Daniel before the king. And as he goes before the king, the first thing he makes sure in verses 24 to 30 is that it is not by his wisdom that he understands the dream and its interpretation, but he gives credit to the God of heaven. And when we go then to verses 31 and forward down to 35, he repeats to the king the dream that he saw a great image that had a head of gold, it had a chest of silver, it had belly and thighs of brass, and legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay, that a stone cut out without hands came and struck the image in its feet, and smashed every part of the image, and became a great mountain. After telling the king his dream, then he gives the interpretation in verses 36 and onward. And there he tells the king that he is the head of gold in verse 38. And after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron breaketh all things, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Then he speaks of the 10 toes that are 10 kings, and in their time is when, in the days, it says in verse 44, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Many expositors jump to an explanation of all 4 kingdoms mentioned in chapter 2 of Daniel. But if we allow the principle that we learned in chapter 1, the Bible and the Bible only, to be our interpreter, then we must let Daniel use this primary education to teach us a simple outline, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, bang, results. That's our grade school education in chapter 2. We have to catch the direction that Daniel's carrying us, and it won't be until chapter 8 that we learn about the second and the third empire, and not till chapter 11 till we learn about the fourth empire. But in chapter 2, we're only told, or only identifies 2 of the empires: Babylon, that head of gold, and the stone that becomes a great mountain, God's everlasting kingdom. Another thing we should note is that the stone was cut out without hands, as Deuteronomy 32:4 says, and in Psalm 18:31, the stone cut out without hands refers to Jesus. He was conceived without an earthly father. The immaculate conception of Jesus is pointed out here, and he is that stone that strikes the image. And we should also point out that in verse 45, it says, the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. From this we're to understand that there's only one interpretation for this dream of Nebuchadnezzar given in chapter 2. This is apocalyptic literature and has only one interpretation. It goes from the prophet's day down to the end of the establishment of God's kingdom. So in conclusion, we should remember that the restoration of God's kingdom prophesied in Daniel 2 comes after the fall of 4 world empires, and only by means of a judgment crisis. When the stone strikes the image, that's a crisis. That's a judgment crisis on the kingdoms of this world. And as the second point in conclusion, the world's wise men cannot uncover God's secrets unless they believe in and ask him. And the third conclusion, the kingdoms mentioned in Daniel 2 are worldwide, consecutive. That's proved in verses 39 and 40, where it says, after thee, and a third, and a fourth. They're consecutive. Don't put them as parallel or as contemporaneous. They're consecutive, they're degenerating, and ultimate, allowing no other interpretation.